I'm Kristen Stawasz, and I am so excited and honored to be speaking with all of you here today. I want to start off by just telling you a little bit about myself. So I am from Westfield. I grew up going to Westfield Public Schools, and I first fell in love with STEM on a class trip to Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama when I was in 7th grade. It was a week full of fun simulations, presentations, speaking with scientists, setting off model rockets. It was the time of my life, and I fell in love with space. And I remember I stayed up the first night reading the little workbook that we got cover to cover while some of my friends were nodding off in the late night lectures. I was attentive the entire time. I just fell in love with space. And one of the things that I learned at Space Camp was that to continue learning about space, I would have to get involved with STEM. So just like that, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And from then on, I did everything I could to teach myself everything that I could about space. A major way that I grew my skills as a scientist throughout high school was by competing in science fairs. And I really can't overemphasize how important of an experience that was for me. Over the course of 4 years, I competed in 13 science fairs, which included a school, regional, and state level competition each of my 4 years of high school. And then my junior year, I was invited to go to the International Science and Engineering Fair, which was in Los Angeles, California that year. Through science fair, I really got to experience a lot of different science fields. Just to give you a quick rundown of each project, my first year, I built an artificial pancreas circuit model. My sophomore year, I experimented with reconfiguring magnets in an electric generator to see if I could improve the power output. My junior year, I experimented to see what the effect of Wi-Fi on plant health was. And my senior year, working with my partner Adrian, we made an inexpensive, rapid lead test kit to test lead levels in drinking water. So what was really important to me about science fair was this hands-on experience and experiencing the joy that comes from making discoveries on your own. So this was a key way that I really came into my own. And then I went to college. As was mentioned, I went to Harvard, and I just graduated last spring in May 2022. My path ended up changing a little bit when I got to college. I ended up majoring in history of science, which is a slightly different way to study STEM. You still need to know science, very much so, to know the history of science. But history of science is really interested in asking a few questions that really resonated with me, like how do we know what we know? How has scientific thought and practice evolved over time? And the question that was really, really interesting to me was how do societal beliefs about race, gender, and sexuality shape not only who gets to be a scientist, but the content of our scientific knowledge itself. So in addition to history of science, I declared a double major with women, gender, and sexuality studies. That's what the WGS in the middle stands for there. So my real interest fell at the intersection of those two fields, studying issues of women and gender in the history of science. And then over here is me standing in front of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, because I also minored in astrophysics, still very much pursuing my love of space in that capacity. And this combination of academic interests also meant that the research I held nearest and dearest to my heart in college was researching the history of women and LGBTQ+ people in astronomy and space exploration. So I really found a way to combine all of those different interests there. But I also think that my academic trajectory gives me a little bit of a unique perspective as both a woman in STEM and someone who studies women in STEM. So I want to talk to you a little bit about those two perspectives today. And real quick before we get there, I wanted to just mention what I do now. My main job is as the public programs coordinator at Castle in the Clouds, which is this beautiful museum in New Hampshire. There I plan programs, special events, classes, lectures that have to do with arts, history, and science. So I get to use a lot of my different interests. Interestingly, it is a museum that is in a very rural location and on the top of a mountain, which makes it a very great place to do some astronomy related programs. So serendipitously, that is part of my job. I am also a volunteer at the McAuliffe Shepherd Discovery Center, which is a space and aviation museum in Concord, New Hampshire. I recently started there volunteering in the observatory, so I invite people up during museum hours. We have a solar telescope. I get to talk to people about how the observatory works, how telescopes work. I get to talk to them about the sun, I get to talk to them about nighttime observing, and I really get to see that spark of passion like I had at Space Camp all those years ago, which I enjoy very much. And I also hold 2 research assistant positions in addition. One is researching how big corporations contribute to the spread of climate misinformation on social media, and the second is as a research assistant for a doctor who is currently writing a book on historic and current barriers to women's health care. So in multiple facets of my life, I am still very much involved with STEM in a number of different ways. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey and some of the barriers I faced along the way. We're going to go back to my sophomore year of high school to science fair. I had just finished presenting my project to a judge, and I was waiting to hear his feedback, and you want to know the first thing he said to me? He said, "You use too much pink on your board." And on the outside I was like, because what else was I supposed to do, right? Like, this was someone who was judging me, it was someone who was an expert, someone who was a lot older than me, someone who I was trying to impress. I felt like I had no other choice but to laugh it off like that. But on the inside I was like, what? For a couple of reasons, because one is there's a lot of colors on this board. It felt weird that he singled out pink. And also for comparison, my senior year, my board was entirely in shades of blue, and no one would dare tell me you have too much blue on your board. Like, what would that even mean? So I was forced to come to this conclusion that he told me that it was a problem that I had pink on my board because pink is girly, and things that are girly aren't taken seriously. And it was really devastating for me as a young, aspiring scientist to be told by this professional his only feedback, constructive criticism for my project, didn't have to do with my science, it didn't have to do with my project, didn't have to do with my thoughts, it had to do with my use of the color pink. So this is my experience. I was told I used too much pink, but I want to tie this into a larger issue that faces women in STEM, and that is the constant need to think about how they are presenting their gender. So my experience is I did something that was perceived as too feminine, and sometimes women in STEM feel like they need to suppress part of themselves in order to be taken seriously and to be seen as competent. But then on the flip side, there are studies that show that women who are perceived as too masculine, who are too assertive or too competent, are seen as unlikable and intimidating. So this is the impossible situation that women in STEM are trying to balance, is needing to be seen as competent, but not too competent or else they're not likable. And this is something that we call the double bind. Can't be too feminine, can't be too masculine. So this is situation number 1. We're gonna come back to this, so keep that in mind, but we're gonna go on to my situation number 2. I took my first computer science class my sophomore year of college, and I was really excited. I was also kind of nervous because it felt like everyone else had so much more experience than I did, but I found a computer science class that was coding in Python for physicists and engineers, so I thought it was perfect for my uses of computer science. The way this class was set up was there was a lecture and there was a lab component, so we would be given an assignment at the beginning of the lab, you would break out into groups and work on this lab together in groups, and then whenever you finished that assignment, you could go out home for the day. So there was this one day I was sitting in class and we were breaking up into the groups, and I was looking around as everyone was starting to form groups, and I had the realization that I was the only woman in the room, which is happening less and less nowadays, which is wonderful, but it still does happen, and it happened to me. And I was looking at all these guys were, huddling up, forming groups, and no one asked me to join their group, and no member of the teaching staff came up to try to help me. And I will admit this is a situation where I probably could have been a little bit more proactive, but it was also a situation that I found incredibly intimidating. So I just decided I was going to work on this lab all by myself instead. So that is this is my experience. I ended up doing my computer science lab alone. In this day, I happened to really understand what was going on. That was not always the case, but it was the case this day. So I did my lab alone. I finished the assignment. I had no questions the whole time. And I closed my laptop and I got to walk out of class a half hour early while everyone else was still working on their labs. And I was like, they all better wish right now that they had asked me to be part of their group. But, well, it worked out for me this day. This also ties into a larger issue. Because so many STEM fields remain male-dominated, it can form this boys club atmosphere that leaves women out. I felt isolated in a couple ways. One was the social isolation. I just wasn't part of a group. I wasn't part of the friend-making experience that everyone else was having in that time. But I think the deeper one for me was I was intellectually isolated. STEM is hard. We all benefit from collaboration. We benefit from hearing each other's ideas, seeing how other people approach problems and work through it. We benefit from each other's knowledge. And this was something that I was left out of. And over time, this is something that could really erode at my confidence, where other people that they're working with and moving forward. If I got stuck, I could just think, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not smart enough to do this. So this is situation number 2. And I'm going to move on to the final situation that I want to talk about today. So this is the same computer science class, a different day, and this time I am part of a group. I did it. I worked up the nerve to approach a group of guys, and I'm like, hey, can I work with you? And so now I'm part of a group. Still the only woman, but I'm working with people. And there was one point where we got stuck. We collectively all got stuck on a problem, and we decided to approach the professor together as a group to ask a question. And when we did, I couldn't help but notice that as the professor was answering, he only made eye contact with me, in this group of me and 4 men. And regardless of what his intention was, it felt really weird because I wasn't even the one who directly asked the question. So it felt super weird that he was only looking at me, and it gave me the impression that he thought that because I was a woman, I was the one who needed the special help in this situation. Everyone else was just asking for my benefit. So my experience was feeling the condescension when asking this question. But this also ties into a larger issue facing women in STEM, and that is this pressure to represent all women, which is a really unfair weight to carry, and one that you absolutely should not. But when you're the only woman in the room, it can really feel like that weight is on your shoulders sometimes, and you have to feel like you are extra smart, like you're never making mistakes, so no one can possibly think anything negatively about women in STEM on your behalf. And that really can affect women because there's this additional pressure to be perfect. You can't ask questions, you can't seek out the help you need. I could very easily decide I never want to approach this professor again because of the way that he made me feel in this moment. And then I'm hurting myself because I'm not seeking out the help that I need. So with all that being said, I want to give you some advice from a woman in STEM. We're gonna go situation by situation. Number 1, this is the pink board. And by the way, I think the pink, being told I use too much pink is what subconsciously influenced my color scheme. But so laugh it off and don't let it bother you. That's what I did. I did the ha ha ha, and it worked out fine for me. I still placed in the science fair. I still progressed to the next level. It worked out for me. Just let it roll off your back. Number 2, this is working on my lab alone. Persevere and prove them wrong. I can't tell you how powerful I felt when I shoved my laptop and walked out of that room. I felt like I was showing them just how incredibly smart I was and how much I deserved to be there. And number 3, this is asking the question, know your worth regardless of what others think. In that situation, I could affirm myself that I was smart, I was capable, I was competent, and it didn't matter what anyone else in the room was thinking. I could know that for myself. And none of this is bad advice, but I think I would be doing you a disservice if I left it here, because you'll notice a lot of this is individual. If only I'm tough enough, if only I can put up with it, if only I can deal with all the terrible things that they're throwing at me, I can make it as a woman in STEM. And that isn't how it should have to be. So I'm going to give you a second set of advice. And this is advice from someone who studies women in STEM and who is looking at this bigger picture. So number one, we have to recognize that scientists have biases. And this can be really hard for us to do because we really like to believe that people in STEM make conclusions based solely on the evidence, that they are purely logical and rational. But we have to face the unfortunate truth that people in STEM are first and foremost people and are therefore subject to the same biases that exist throughout the rest of society. Number two, discuss your experiences with others to find commonalities. This is for a couple different reasons. One is it can be super supportive to know that you're not alone, to recognize the other women in the room or in your field who are experiencing similar challenges. But then the other is to find those commonalities, because that helps you to identify what the real issues facing women in STEM are, so then you can tackle them head on. And I hope I gave you a little bit of a model of how this can be done through my presentation today, connecting my individual experience to this larger experience that women in STEM face. And number three, we have to be intentional and proactive about making STEM a place that is welcoming for everyone. I am not accusing anyone in any of these stories of being intentionally sexist. Let's take that science fair judge for an example. I don't think he was like, pink is girly and girls are bad at STEM, so I'm gonna tell this girl that pink is bad. Like, I don't think that was the thought process there, right? But I think it's a comment he made without thinking about what perhaps the underlying implication was, which is why it's so important that we need to be thoughtful, conscientious, and intentional in everything we do with STEM to make sure we are actively making it a place for everyone to not just survive, but to thrive. And thank you. That's what I wanted to talk to you about.